Mayor?
Yes. As long as it's good with you, it's good with me.
Today is good.
All right.
All right, folks, thank you very much. Two questions for reporters. We'll kick it off with Justin Lawrence. We'll go down the line.
So, despite the success that you've touted in your first term, even as the COVID money runs out, the city's going to face tough decisions down the road. Some of your opponents in the race have proposed new revenue ideas. What's your plan to continue this and into your second term if you're elected? And, where do we go?
Well, first and foremost, we were very aware that the monies that came from the federal government would probably never come again. And so we were very intentional and thoughtful about the kind of investments that we intend to make, and we have made. The investments that we're going to make that are one-time that will redound to the benefit of the communities that they're in for many years to come. We also have not just relied upon the federal government dollars, but as you know, we've also increased our own bonding authority. We've gone into the marketplace several times, most recently with our social impact bond. So we are kind of controlling our own destiny, and we do not anticipate what you hear thrown around all the time, oh, there's going to be a fiscal cliff when the federal government money runs out. We were not and knew that we could not rely solely upon monies from the federal government to do the things, make the kind of investments that were necessary. But as I said in my remarks, what our putting our fiscal house in order has meant is it's freed up dollars for us to be able to make those necessary investments. So, the federal dollars will end whenever they end, but we're going to continue on because of the dollars that we are putting in from our resources to make sure that our recovery is as robust as possible, and I feel pretty confident about that.
And I might have missed it. I don't think I heard you say today, but you've said it in the past, and it's in one of your campaign commercials, that you say Chicago has the best economy in the country. And you kind of, put some meat on that bone.
Yeah, I think what I said is that Chicago has the most diverse economy in the country, and as a consequence of that, we have come back from COVID, I think, better than what we've seen in other cities. And again, I think one of the biggest proof points is we exceeded our financial projections in 21, meaning more revenues came in the door than we anticipated. We're pretty conservative in our projection. We exceeded our revenue projections for 22. We're still tallying up the final numbers there. But what that has allowed us to do is that prepayment of the pension obligation to the tune of $250 million, that is a direct result of the fact that our economy is coming back. And what we're also hearing, for example, from the hospitality industry that was really hit, I think, in some ways the hardest of every other industry, is they're seeing, whether it's bars, restaurants, hotels, better than pre-pandemic numbers over the course of the summer and the fall. So that's, I think, a couple of data points that tells us that we're moving in the right direction. Plus, I think the confidence that investors have in the city of Chicago, $10 billion in 21 and another $10 billion in 22 in growth investment, that's a pretty remarkable sign of the investors' confidence in the Chicago economy.
You talked a lot about pension successes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Springfield.
Yes.
No action on that in this term. Is that a priority for you in the next? And are you worried about pension costs crowding out government service in the next 4 years?
Well, I think every mayor of every municipality in the state is concerned about that. We are all laboring to meet our pension obligations, and there has to be some structural solutions. So I'm not giving up. And I'm not waiting till a next term. This past year, in an election year, wasn't the right time to reignite those conversations. But I've had recent conversations with folks about the need to get back and finish the business that we were promised would happen after the downstate pensions, police and fire pensions, were consolidated. We were supposed to, meaning the city of Chicago and other municipalities, we were supposed to be next. So I'm going to, and have started to kind of re-up those conversations. It's too early to talk about specifics at this point, but we've got to remind people that this pension systems for municipalities all across our state are underwater, unfunded, and we've got to fix them.
I have a question from Heather Sharon. How do you explain the difference, the 7-hour 7-hour gap between when CPS officials told you deputy campaign manager and when you stopped emails. How does that square with your statement that you put an immediate stop?
Well, there wasn't a 7-hour gap. As I've said now multiple times, and I'm happy to answer the question again. Number one, I learned about this issue in the late afternoon of whatever day it was. I think it was January 11th. As soon as I knew, I put a stop to it. So that's pretty immediate. And not only that, as I mentioned when I stepped before the cameras the next day, we put new controls in place in our campaign. We retrained campaign staff. I reiterated then that next day to our cabinet and to the mayor's office that there has to be that impenetrable wall. So when I knew about it, I immediately took action, period.
Greg Wall, ABC.
Mayor, what do you say to those who may have listened to this speech and say it seems like this was a real campaign speech to win over the business community to raise money in the stretch run?
I would say it's always a good thing for us to remind people, all stripes, that our city finances and our economy are rock solid. This isn't something new. I've been talking about this for a long time. When I appeared in front of the City Club back in April, I talked about the same thing, that our Chicago recovery is robust. So there are always going to be critics, but showing people what we've done and how we've been fiscal fiduciaries of the taxpayer dollars is always a good thing, and it's something that every mayor should talk about if they've got something to say, and I think we've got a good story to tell here.
If I can ask you about preparations for the release of the tapes from Memphis tonight.
Yeah.
Obviously, I know that's going to be on your mind. Police department has put out their statement, but can you talk about the concerns that you have for any kind of violence, looting, or mayhem that might happen here? And just because obviously the crime is such a concern for voters, if something gets out of hand,
Yeah.
that's a campaign issue.
Well, put aside the politics. We need our city to be safe. We have a long tradition of peaceful protests in the city, and I'm calling upon everyone of goodwill. Look, from what I've been led to believe, these are going to be really tough videos for people to watch. And people are going to have a lot of emotional reaction to them. But I hope that that emotional reaction doesn't lead to destruction of property, acts of violence, or other things that frankly undermine, I think, the strength of our city. We've got to be better than that. As I said, we have a long history of peaceful protests in this city, and I'm hoping that that long history holds. You'll remember when the, well, yeah, but I'm going to give you another example, right? When the video of the murder of Laquan McDonald was released right before Thanksgiving in 2015, I think we all held our breath and were worried about what would happen. And of course, people protested, but the protests were peaceful. Our city did not come apart. Now, obviously, we've had the intervening circumstance of what happened with George Floyd, but we have been doing extensive outreach to civil rights leaders across our city, faith community leaders, business community leaders, since we understood that the video was going to release. I got read into this over the last weekend, and we put plans in place because we learned a lot from 2020, and we know that we have to reach out. We know we have to educate people and listen to them about what their concerns are. So it's not just about law enforcement, although we are ready and we have activated, I think, security plans that will remain in place while we see this thing play out. Now, would I have liked that Memphis released these videos during the daylight hours and not on a Friday? You bet. I've been very clear about that. I've had conversations with lots of mayors across the country this week that are also feeling the anxiety. But number one is we must express ourselves peacefully. That's what we do to honor the legacy of Mr. Nichols. That's what we do to honor the legacy of his family. I know his family is also calling for peaceful response. So we owe it to them and we owe it to ourselves to express ourselves, express outrage, express anger, but do it in a peaceful and constructive way. And we're going to continue, obviously, to monitor the circumstances through the course of the day. We have no actual intelligence that anything untoward is going to happen here, but we must be prepared, and we are prepared.
Thank you, Mayor Shia.
Switching
Yeah.
gears back to City Club, it is businessy. Have you had any conversations with the CEO of McDonald's to see, was so critical? Is there any kind of ongoing trying to build relationships or get his support?
I've reached out to him several times directly and through his people. His people have been very communicative, but I haven't heard from the CEO.
What about, can we switch again to Springfield? What
Yeah.
are your 3 top priorities? You've already got a casino. Does that mean you're going to look for something else now in Springfield?
Well, look, there's always things that are a priority for us in Springfield. During the veto session in lame dunk, we were very focused on the assault weapons ban and high magazine, so I'm grateful that that has passed. We're very supportive of the work that was done through Representative Kelly Cassidy on I call it the bodily autonomy, but reaffirming our support for access to gender-affirming care, as well as reproductive health care access. We'll always have a watchful eye on Springfield to make sure that we're not getting unfunded mandates and that we're getting our fair share through particularly the local government fund. But there are other things that I'll talk about when it's appropriate. But yeah, we have a robust Springfield agenda that I'm going to be talking more about around March 1st.
David, BJ.
Mayor, there's talk in business circles about the possibility of trying to re-amortize the state's pension. Would you be supportive of such a move, or would you ever consider re-amortizing the city's pension?
Well, listen, as I said earlier, I think there's a lot of structural things that we have to do, and I think we've been waiting our turn, and it's now time for municipalities across the state to get our due. All of us have done all the things that the rating agencies and others have told us to do, right? We have made my government work more efficiently. And in Chicago, we haven't cut services, but other municipalities have been forced to cut services, have been forced to lay people off, and yet they're still suffering. So this is something that I think Springfield and the governor's office have to take notice of and start the process. I'm not naive to think that this is something that even can get done in one legislative session, but the work that was tried before that the Supreme Court rejected, the problems haven't gotten smaller, they've gotten bigger. So we've got to unite with our friends in organized labor, get to the table, make some hard choices, but do the right thing to make sure that our pension funds are actually available for our retirees.
The concern about re-amortization is the idea of you kicking the can down the road, but others argue that you could actually pay down pensions over time.
Look, I think that we have to have, again, I'm not prepared to talk about specifics here, but we have to be at the table with all the relevant stakeholders that think about structural changes that are necessary to shore up our pensions, not taking away the benefits that existing retirees are getting. We've got to look through other things that we can do. And again, you know the list, but what's missing is the political will, and we've got to find it, because all the great things that we've done in Chicago, if we still are pouring money into a system that is fundamentally flawed, it's going to become the tail that wags the dog of city government. And we have too much work to do to shore up our neighborhoods and communities and make sure that we put our workers back to work. And it can't just be all consumed by paying our pension debt. We're going to meet our obligation. I think we've demonstrated that, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and we have to do it in partnership with the state, with the legislature, and with our organized labor partners.
Mariah, WBZ.
Hi, Mayor.
Hi there.
I have a couple of education-related questions.
Sure.
It's obviously going to be a big theme in the next term, in your potential next term, in the next 4 years with the elected school board, moratorium ending. My first question is, would you close under-enrolled schools once the moratorium on school closings ends?
No, that is not the approach we would take. Look, we know that there are schools that have small populations. And the first thing you have to do is talk to the people in those communities, the students and the parents, the LSCs, the building principals, and others, to talk about what we can do to make sure that the quality of education that kids in those schools are getting is first rate, period. Look, you know this, but the wounds from the 50 school closures and the process by which those closures came to be, those wounds are still really fresh. And people in those communities are hurting, they're angry, and they're very, very skeptical. And so we have to do multiple things. This is, to me, is not just a CPS issue. If we rebuild those neighborhoods by re-injecting them with economic development and affordable housing and green spaces and all the things that we are doing right now, we're going to rebuild that population. And that's important. We've got to demonstrate to people who have been burned too many times by government, that we come in peace. I mean, it's simply put, that we are there to listen, we're there to join tables that have already been set, and that we need to work with them because they're the closest to the challenges, which means they're closest to the solutions. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, the moratorium is lifted, let's close a bunch of schools. That's never happening on my watch. We've got to work with community, and we're doing that now. We're going into those communities where we see the population in schools is challenged, and having those conversations now. We're not just going to inject more pain into those communities. That's not the way to get things done.
Thinking back on your past 4 years, is there one thing that you could
Has it just been 4 years?
your past decade, essentially.
Lifetime.
Is there one thing you could highlight that you would change about your approach to the Chicago Teachers Union, or one thing you want to do better or different in your next 4 years?
Look, I came into this job hoping that I would actually have a good relationship with the CTU. I sought their endorsement 4 years ago. I don't want to be in conflict with the teachers union, but it's a two-way street, and they have to decide that they don't want to be in conflict with me as mayor. Now, obviously, they're running a candidate against me, and the new president of the CTU was here some months ago saying everybody in the city knows that we need a new mayor. It's hard to build a relationship under those circumstances, but my door's open. My door's open.
Anything specific that you want to do in the next term? Like, how will you start your term off trying to be on good footing with them after they've supported an opponent?
Well, as I said, my door is open. CEO Martinez, I think, has established a good, productive working relationship with them. And look, in the first instance, CPS really owns responsibility for that relationship, not me. But I think that there are things that we should be able to reach common ground on. For example, I feel very strongly that our schools have to remain open. We heard that loud and clear from parents and students. We know from the data that learning loss that happened accelerated during the forced remote learning. That's something that we actually should be able to work on together, not be in conflict with. And I'd love that opportunity. But I think there's many other things that we can and should be working on together, because when our school system is healthy, not in conflict, not closed, people will stay in our city. What are the two questions that people ask about a city if they're going to move to it or going to stay? What's public safety like? What are the schools like? And we lost too many people because of the conflict that they saw. It wasn't reliable. You didn't know from moment to moment if the schools are going to be open. That's not good for our city. We have to be in partnership with our teachers. And I have gone, and I will continue to extend my hand in friendship, not just to the CTU leadership, but to teachers. And again, the proof is in the pudding. Jesse Sharkey himself said, we gave CTU the best contract that they'd ever had. Teachers are going to be making $100,000 plus, depending on their level of seniority. We have met our contractual obligations of putting more social workers, more counselors, and other support services into the classrooms. We've met our obligations in making sure that we're putting investments into infrastructure in our schools. So, as I say, it takes two to tango. My hand is extended. My door is open if they want to actually be in partnership and collaboration with us. We're not going to agree on every issue. We don't have to. We have 40-something unions across the city, but the only two that we have conflict with is teachers and the FOP.
Thank you,
An
everyone.
interesting combination.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you.